All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Torah Studies, our weekly look at the Torah portion. This week, Torah portion is Korach, and we have a problem. And I'll tell you why I say we have a problem. We have a problem because of inconsistency. If there's one thing that people hate most, it is inconsistency. Now, how do I know this? I know this because if you ever go to a school and you hang around kids in a playground, the one thing you'll hear across the board, every school, every class, every country, maybe, don't know, but making that up. No matter where you go, you will hear the same complaint. What is the one thing, and this is open to everybody, what is the one thing that kids will always complain about? It's the one thing kids will always complain about inevitably.
Not enough recess.
Not enough recess. Okay, that's true also. Not the one I was thinking of.
Having to go to school in the first place.
Having to go to school in the first place. Okay, they don't want to go to school. But what else? They're there. They're at recess. They're at recess. What's the complaint? It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. This is not fair. That's not fair. The thing that the kids notice most and what gets them upset most is inconsistency. What is inconsistency? It means, why did he do it? Why did she do it? Well, that's not fair. Right? Consistency and rules is what people like. Today, I'm going to point out an inconsistency in the Torah that I think is, hey Ramon, that I think is going to bother all of us. Now, it's an inconsistency between a famous story and good to see you, and a not so famous story. As sometimes happens, some stories in Torah, for whatever reason, made it big in the limelight and became famous, and other stories maybe aren't so famous. What we're going to do today is take a famous story and a not so famous story, both in the book of Numbers, in the fourth book of the Torah, and pose a contradiction. Pose a question. It's not fair, it's not right, it's not consistent, and we're not going to like it until we discover that the inconsistency teaches us so much about what it means to be a true leader. All right, so that's all on tap today. So we're going to begin by a quick overview. I'll share a quick overview of this week's Torah portion, Korach. Korach is named after a guy whose name was Korach, right? What do you call it? The eponymus, eponymous. One of those words that I've read a million times and have never said in conversation, because who would have thought? It just doesn't come up, flowing off the tongue in conversation. Korach was a Levi. He was the cousin of Moshe, the cousin of Aaron. Aaron was the priest, right? He was, but everyone else in the fam, short for family, everyone else in the fam was a Levi, including Korach, who was the cousin of Moshe. Great. Korach begins, or the Torah portion opens with Korach lodging a formal complaint. Ramon, if you don't mind, to get us started, please, with text number 1. Actually, hold on 1 second. Let me make sure I have my text open in front of me, which I do. All right, if you don't mind, please take it away. This is text 1a.
Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kehath, the son of Levi, took himself to a side, along with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and on the sons of Peleth, descendants of Reuben. They confronted Moses alongside 250 men from the children of Israel, chieftains of the congregation, representatives of the assembly, men of repute. They assembled against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much for yourselves. For the entire congregation, everyone is holy, and God is among them. So why do you raise yourself above God's people?"
All right, this is it. The complaint is lodged. Thank you, Ramon. The complaint is lodged. Madua tisnasu akal Hashem. Why do you raise yourselves above God's people? We're all holy. Everyone's holy. Why the leadership? Why the hierarchy? That is the question. That is the core question. Now, I will say that as many commentaries as there are, this is a sentence that will ultimately build itself. I have confidence. There are as many different opinions as to what Korach's intent actually was. But what does he say? And again, depending on which commentary you're studying, you might get a different slant on the story, but let's read this in a very straightforward fashion. In a very straightforward fashion, Korach says, the entire congregation is holy. God spoke to all of us at Sinai. He doesn't say that, but I'm kind of like filling that in. We're all holy. What's with the leadership? What's with the... We're all leaders. Let us all be leaders. Right? Can you imagine? By the way, speaking of which, now you might be thinking that's Meshuggah, and that might be true, but it reminds me of the joke where the Yeshiva University, the YU, rowing team always came in last place. Many of you know this joke. And they decided to go to Harvard to see how the Harvard rowing team works, because apparently they're not always in last place. And the rep comes back and says, guys, I figured out the problem. At Harvard, they have one guy yelling orders and 9 guys rowing. Here we have 10 guys yelling orders and there's no one rowing. Fine, that's the joke. But Korach says, we're all leaders. We're all holy. What happens? Moshe immediately springs into action, defending his leadership. No, you got it wrong. Hashem's going to prove it. And ultimately it ends in disaster for Korach and this attempted mutiny. Take a look at the following text. We continue the narrative. We've kind of spliced it up for ease of reading. Take a look at text 1b. Ramon, please, you'll stick with the ones if you don't mind. Text 1b.
Moses heard and fell on his face. He spoke to Korah and his company, saying, in the morning God will make known and draw close to him those who are his and holy. The one he chooses, he will draw near to him. Moses said to Korah, please listen, sons of Levi. Is it not enough that the God of Israel has distinguished you from the entire congregation of Israel to draw you near to him, to perform the service in his tabernacle, and to stand before the people to minister to them? He draw you near along with all you brothers, the sons of Levi, and now you seek the priesthood as well. All
right, so that's the question. What's going on? You want also the priesthood? One more verse on the next page.
Therefore you and your entire assembly are uprising against God. But what is Aaron that you should complain against him?
Thank you. So we see clearly that he's complaining, Korach is, and gathering people also building this coalition to take down the leadership. He doesn't like the leadership of Moses. Moshe doesn't like the leadership of Aaron. He wants to bring him down. And again, his core complaint was, everyone is holy. We don't need the hierarchy. We're all leaders. And can't we all just lead ourselves or all be elevated to leaders? What's with the hierarchy? Text 1c. Okay, so 1 second. Before we continue the next text. So again, it's cut and splice. But what you need to know is that Moses, goes to his cousin and he begs and he pleads and he says, turn it around. It's not too late. Back down. But they press and he says, all right, tomorrow Hashem, God Almighty, will let known whom he has chosen to indeed lead the people. And what happens the next day is that God accepts the offering of Aaron and takes out the 250. Takes out the people that had brought the incense in this kind of incense battle. God turns against them and approves the leadership of Moses and Aaron, and it culminates in one of the most unusual demises in the Bible, and the Torah likes unusual demises. I don't know if it likes it, but it's not like. But this one is quite unique. Take a look at text 1c, please. One more here.
What's he mean when he's asking for what is Aaron that you should complain against him?
The way the commentators explain it, that last line, what is Aaron that you should complain against him? Meaning Aaron is so humble, like he's not doing anything of his own. Like, what are you picking on Aaron for? Like, he was literally put into a position that he himself wasn't looking for, and now you're saying he shouldn't be there. Like, come on, what are you doing?
I always thought that was interesting because it seemed like they initially came to Moses with the
right,
rather than Aaron.
They're looping everybody in.
Yeah.
They're looping all the leadership in. Yeah, it does switch. Right. He starts with Moses. He switches to Aaron. Okay. I don't know if it's switching, but he's including both of them, both parties into it. All right, so text 1c, and this is the demise of Korach and his crew.
God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Disassociate from this congregation, and I will destroy them in an instant." The earth beneath them split open. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their houses and all the men who were with Korah and all the property. They and all their possessions fell alive into the grave. The earth covered them up, and they were lost to the nation.
Well, that's it. They were swallowed by the earth. And that's how that story and the rebellion or the attempted coup or whatever you want to call it, that's how that ended. All right, again, a very unusual death. And look, I said this before, but it bears repeating. There are so many commentaries on Torah. I'm saying classic biblical commentaries. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And everyone has a take on the story. And they're all fascinating. There's Midrashim and there's the Talmud. There's classic commentaries. It's beautiful. But again, right now, and we're going somewhere with all this. So right now, we're just going to keep it fairly straightforward. Korach builds a bit of a coalition, comes to Moses, challenges the leadership of Moses, challenges the leadership of his brother Aaron. Moses says it's in your best interest to back down and stop this. He presses forward. They all die, and Korach and his inner crew, like the inner crew, they're swallowed by the earth, and that's how it ends. Okay, so that's the story in a nutshell. I said at the beginning that we're going to compare and contrast this with another tale that's lesser known. This tale is fairly well known. There's another tale that is much lesser known, and that is the story of Eldad and Medad. Eldad and Medad. And you might be wondering, who is Eldad and Medad? You know what's funny? I said this before. I don't know how some verses became famous, some stories became famous, and some stories kind of became lost or just a little bit more relegated to obscurity. I don't know who decided which stories go viral and which stories don't. But there is a story of two guys, Eldad and Medad, and I'm going to give you the background of the story. What's the deal with Eldad and Medad? It happened when the Jewish people came to Moses and said, "We need meat." And Moses said, "Are you actually kidding me?" I'm paraphrasing. Do I look like a chef? What is happening here? Can you imagine Moses rethinking his life choices? Like, I was a shepherd in Midian, minding my own business, when God appears to me at a burning bush and says, "Will you rescue my people?" I said no. God forced me. I said yes. And it was complicated, and it was really crazy, and it worked out, and then we got the Torah, and then we had the golden calf, and then we fixed it, and we built the tabernacle, and everything is good, and now the people are complaining because they want brisket, and I don't even know what to do. You want to learn Torah? I'm a Torah teacher. You want meat? Seriously. He goes to God and says, "I am out." They want meat now. It's like, after all this, they're still complaining, and because they want beef. Done. Forget it. I'm out. So Moses says, look. So God says, "All right, listen. We're gonna make this work. Choose 70 elders, and I'm gonna take from my spirit and give some of. Try this again. God says to Moses, "Appoint 70 leaders, and I will take," God says, "from your spirit and place some of it on them, and then you'll basically have a committee of leaders, and maybe if they need meat or other things, they can go to other people, and they don't have to go to you," meaning we're going to kind of diversify the leadership a little bit and create somewhat of a board. That is the upshot of this. Well, how do you get to the number 70? And I know what you're thinking. Choose 70 people. But it's not so simple. It's not so simple because of the maths. Here we go. There were 12 tribes. And if you want to make this equal leadership representation from the tribes, what is the closest number that you can get? Let me see if I can articulate this. That you can get from 12 tribes to the number 70. How many representatives per tribe? Let's go.
72.
72.
6 is 2 more. Is 72.
6 times 12.
72.
Ding, ding, ding. I wish we had like a little bell. That's exactly what it is. Moses chooses 6 of these 6 leaders. These are not the spies. These are different leaders. They went rogue last week. So these 6 leaders per tribe. 72. The problem is God said 70. So here's what happened next. They drew lots. Okay? 2 were going to get blank slips of paper. 70 of them said the word Navi. You know what the word Navi means? Navi?
Prophet.
Prophet. Not the prophet, but the prophet.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that changed anything, but the PH, right? The PH, the prophet. 70 slips, like a straight up drawing lots. They took a hat or whatever it was, a basket, a box, or whatever they had back then. A hollowed out cacti. I'm kidding. I don't know if there are cacti in the Sinai desert. And they filled it with 72 slips of paper. And 70 of them said Navi, prophet, and 2 of them were blanks. And everyone picked a little folded up piece of paper or a parchment or papyrus, whatever they had. They opened it up. 70 were appointed Navi, and 2 drew the short straw. And at this point, you can probably figure out who those 2 were. Eldad and Medad. Those were the guys that were part of the original 72 selection, but didn't make the cut. Can you imagine? Can you imagine lehavdil, to create a very strong separation between Torah and sports? But can you imagine if the NCAA or a professional sport said, guys, we're going to have a 48-team playoff situation, or even World Cup. World Cup is happening. There are 48 teams in the World Cup, according to my intel. I believe so. Right? Imagine if the FIFA International, always on the take, FIFA. If FIFA, I'm kidding, FIFA or not, FIFA International says, guys, we have 50, always on the take, 50 slots. Sorry, 48 slots. So what do we do? We're going to choose 50 teams. And then there's a lottery, ping pong balls, whatever it is. 2 teams that have been pre-selected are not going to make it. That kind of stinks for those 2 guys. But so it goes. Eldad and Medad drew the short stick. All the 70 went out, and they were prophesying in that moment, whatever was happening. I don't know the details. But Eldad and Medad ended up also gaining the spirit of prophecy in their own tents, because they were from the original prophets. And by the way, their prophecy was intense. See what I did there? Intense. Okay, let's take a look. Sorry. Let's take a look. Really, I mean, it's very quiet. Crickets. Let's take a look at the Torah's description of this tale, because it is quite spectacular. All right, Dasi, if you don't mind, please read text 2a.
God said to Moses, "Assemble for me 70 men among the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the people's elders and officers, and take them to the tent of meeting, and they will stand there beside you. I will descend and speak to you there, and I will separate some of the spirit that is upon you and bestow it upon them. Then they will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you need not bear it alone."
There you go. We have now delegation of some sort of power, responsibility, leadership, where not only will Moses lead, but now there's another 70. But like I told you, originally 72 were selected. 70 made the final cut. 2 remained behind. Text 2b tells us what happened with those 2, i.e. Eldad and Medad.
Moses went out and told the people what God had said, and he assembled 70 men of the people's elders and stood them around the tent. God descended in a cloud and spoke to him, and he separated some of Moses' spirit and bestowed it upon the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied once and then stopped. Now 2 men remained in the camp. One was Eldad, the other was Medad, and the spirit continued to rest upon them. They were among those whose names Moses had written, but they did not go out to the tent. Instead, they prophesied in the camp.
Thank you. Now, you might be wondering, tent, camp, what's the difference? Tent is tent of meeting, the Olmod, meeting the Mishkan. So 70 of them went with Moses to, like, near the ark, and not in that space, but outside the curtain, like in the holiest space of the tabernacle. And 2 of them that were originally selected, they didn't make the cut. They stayed home and watched the World Cup, as it were. Kidding. Then what happens? They gain a spirit of prophecy. That becomes a crisis. Now you might be thinking, what's the crisis? Well, let's continue text 2c. The Torah tells us what the crisis was.
The lad ran and told Moses, saying, "Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp." Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' servant from his youth, responded and said, "Moses, my master, imprison them." Moses said to him, "Are you zealous for my sake? If only all God's people were prophets, that God would bestow his spirit upon them.
Okay, so here we go. Let's break down the story. First of all, super cryptic. It's important to understand that the commentaries fill in the gaps. So the lad, all right, not identified, but some youth comes and tells Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Now you might be thinking, who cares? Well, Joshua gets all upset and he says, you gotta lock them up. Lock them up for prophesying? What's the problem? Here's what you need to know. Rashi, taking it from the classic sages, explains, what was the prophecy that Eldad and Medad were saying? You know what it was? You ready for this? Moses is going to die and Joshua is going to lead the people into the promised land. No one had any clue that Moses at that point was not going to be leading the people into the promised land. And now these two people were saying Moses will perish in the wilderness and Joshua will lead the people into Israel, into the promised land. Guess who gets nervous about that? Who's the one that gets the most offended by that? Not Moses. Guess who? Joshua. Why? It's about him. It's about him. He loves his teacher. He's like, no. Lock these guys up. Shut them down. Like this, stop this from happening. Don't say this prophecy. I don't want to hear this. So that's kind of what's going on. That's the reaction of Joshua. And what does Moses say? I'm going to put this back up on the screen. What does Moshe say? Are you zealous for my sake? And the Hebrew is, Umi yitain kol am Hashem neviim. It's like halavai. If only everybody was a prophet. If only all God's people were prophets, that God would bestow His spirit upon them. Now I got to ask you a question. Contradiction. When Korach says everyone's holy, everyone's a leader, Moses says, no. I'm the only leader. And when Eldad and Medad begin prophesying, what does Moses say? Everybody should be a prophet. Can you please make up your mind? Do we want to democratize this, or do we want to consolidate this? What's going on here? And I should have mentioned, and I didn't, and I failed to mention before, the story of Eldad and Medad takes place 5 chapters prior to our Torah portion, the story of Korach. Moses has already established this idea that he's like, let everybody be a prophet. You be a prophet. You be a prophet. I don't want to lock someone up for having prophecy. Let everybody be a prophet. And so Korach, in the beginning of this, so 5 chapters later, Korach comes to Moses and says, everyone's a leader. And Moses says, nope, only one. What's going on here? Does Moses believe in the power of the people? Does he believe in the fact that everybody could be a prophet? Or everybody should be a leader? Or does he want that power, as it were, to be consolidated at the top? Which one is it? From the story of Eldad and Medad, it seems to imply that Moses is about, again, democratization of prophecy. Everyone should be a prophet. When it comes to our Torah portion, Moses seems to be very protective over this idea of power. What is going on? What is the truth about what's right here and what's wrong here and what is the truth? And wherein lies the difference between these two stories? A story that we all know perhaps, but a story, the second story, or in the chronology of this, the first story, that maybe we are not so familiar with. How do we reconcile these two tales? And I think,
a question?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Doreen.
What's the difference between a leader and a prophet?
Good. That's what we're about to get into. Excellent. Because if you pay attention to the nuances of the story, when does Moses say everybody should be, that's when it comes to prophecy. When does Moses say, no, it's only room for one at the top? That's when it comes to leadership. But what I want to actually take the word leadership and divide it into 2 different categories. And the way we're going to do this is by looking at what is the true role of a leader. And the way we're going to figure that out is by looking at Torah itself. To understand what is the role, what is the purpose, what is the role, what is the function, and therefore what is the criteria of a leader. The best way to do this is by looking again at Torah. If we want to know what Torah says about leadership, let's turn to literally the Torah itself. Now, where does Torah tell us about the nature of leadership? Interestingly, if we continue down kind of this narrative about Moses passing away and Joshua taking over, well, Moses it becomes very clear that Moses is going to pass away. And before he does, he turns to God and says, God, we need to appoint, or you need to appoint, a new leader in my lifetime. And really it's because so that there shouldn't be a vacuum of power. One of the worst things that happens sometimes is when the leader is gone and then there's individuals or whatever vying for that position. That creates all sorts of chaos. And we find this in many different scenarios. It could be in a family, in a situation where there are children that are, whatever the word is, vying for various things, whatever that is. Jostling. There you go. Jostling. Like the actor Ryan Gosling. I'm kidding. Right. So jostling for different things, and it creates a lot of havoc. And it's the same thing is true. It could be in a corporation. It could be true in many different scenarios. So Moshe wants to the ultimate, the consummate Jewish leader wants to make sure that that's avoided. So he says, we got to appoint a new leader. He says to God, you got to appoint a new leader in my time. Not that he's going to start leading, but that it should be clear, who the plan of succession. So take a look-see at how Moses describes the job criteria. All right, here we go. This is going to be text number 3. Okay, Toba, please read text 3.
Moses spoke to God, saying, May the God of spirits, the God of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who will go forth before them and come before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that God's people will not remain like sheep without a shepherd. God said to Moses, Take for yourself Joshua the son of Nun, a man of spirit, and lay your hand upon him, and present before Eleazar the high priest and before the entire congregation, and command him in their presence. Bestow some of your splendor upon him, so that the entire Israelite congregation will take heed.
All right, so God says, good point. We need a new leader. We need to appoint a new leader so that there's no vacuum of power of leadership. And so who is going to be the leader? Take for yourself Joshua the son of Nun, the same Joshua that we mentioned before. So Joshua will be the next leader, and that needs to happen before Eleazar the high priest and before the entire congregation. Command them in their presence. The entire congregation will take heed. Basically, there shouldn't be any question, any doubt. Imagine if people say, well, should Joshua really been the leader? Should someone? That's the last thing you want. Make it very clear who the next leader is. God will make it clear. Moshe will make it clear that Joshua, Yeshua, who was one of the 12 spies we read about last week, that did not become corrupted, so he will be the next leader, and that will be very clear. Okay, makes sense? All right, I have a few questions. All right, just a few questions, a few innocent questions, nothing to see here. I'm kidding. Of course, everything to see here. Take a look at text at verse number 17. Look how Moses actually 16. How does Moses describe the leader? He says, may God appoint a man over, may the God of spirits. The question is, why does it say God of spirits, plural? Elokei, in the Hebrew, Elokei haruchot, or haruchos, God of spirits. What spirits? Why plural? And so the commentaries say, because if you lead a lot of people, you need to be a master of spirits, plural. You got to know the spirit, the soul, the tendencies of every person that you're leading. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to relate to them. They won't be able to relate to you. You have to relate to people not just as a homogeneous whole, but rather as individuals. So that's one point. One point is you can relate to people as individuals. That is one criteria. In verse 17, though, look what Moses says. This leader is somebody who needs to go forth before them and come before them, and then who will lead them out and bring them in. What is the redundancy? Go forth before them, come before them, will lead them out and bring them in. It seems to be saying the same thing twice, if not 4 times. What does that mean? God's people should not remain like a sheep without a shepherd. That makes a lot of sense. Joshua, take yourself Joshua, that makes sense. But then it's lay your hand upon him. Lay your hand upon him. In the Hebrew, by the way, it is v'samachta es yadcha alav. Samachta, place your hand, lean your hand upon him. You know what that sounds like? Smicha. You know what smicha is? Have you ever heard the word smicha? Smicha is rabbinic ordination. Rabbinic ordination called smicha because The idea of transferring the Torah or whatever this is from Torah, from one, whatever we call this whole thing, from one generation to another, from teacher to student, from master to disciple. That is the idea of smicha, laying one's hands. I think there's a phrase of laying hands that this does not refer to, right? It's not laying hands, but it's laying hands. Smicha. So this is the first smicha, was given from Moshe to Yeshua, from Moses to Joshua. Then, if you keep on reading, the Torah has another phrase that's very interesting. Verse 20, bestow some of your splendor upon him. So the entire congregation will take heed. Bestow some of your splendor. So there's two things that he needs to do. Lay your hand upon him and bestow some of your splendor. You might be wondering, what's going on? Place your hand upon him, bestow some of your splendor upon him. What is happening? What are we doing? The Midrash addresses this text number 4. The Midrash explains the difference between laying your hand and bestowing your splendor. Take a look at this, and if you think this is going to clarify, then you've never studied the Midrash before. Text number 4. Lay your hand upon him, like lighting one candle from another. Bestow some of your splendor upon him, like pouring from one vessel to another. Okay, clear as mud, as a good friend used to say, right? What is going on here? Lay your hand upon him is like lighting a candle. Bestow some of your splendor is like pouring water, pouring from one vessel to another. What does that mean? What is happening here?
One takes away from the original and one doesn't.
Oh, there we go. So what's the difference between lighting a candle and pouring? And the answer is, one takes away from the original, the pouring does, and one does not. Meaning, in one scenario, we call this, maybe we can use the phrase, a zero-sum game, which means that there's only X amount of liquid. So if I imagine, someone has a bottle of water, and someone is thirsty and wants some water. And they say, can I have some water? And you take your water bottle and you pour half your water and give it to the other guy. Guess what? He gets half, and now you get half. Meaning you only have half. Whatever you pour to the other guy, you don't have. When you light a candle, the magic of fire is that you light someone else's candle. Now they have light, and your light does not diminish. I've never seen a candle that after you lit it, I've seen it go out if you don't do it properly, whatever. But I've never seen a candle that after you light another candle, somehow the flame is now 50%. Not so. You can light a candle. You can light many candles. Like Hanukkah, you light the menorah, or the Chanukiah, or Shabbat, you light candles. And the original is not diminished at all. That's not a problem. So what we have here are two metaphors. Two metaphors. The metaphor of fire, the metaphor of water. And each one is describing a different modality of transference. One in which the original is diminished, and one in which the original is not diminished at all. And the reason for these two metaphors is because when it comes to leadership, because this is the context of these verses, the context of the Midrash is about a description of the transferring of leadership. When it comes to leadership, there are two roles. One role is diminished, and one role is not diminished. Let's talk about that. When you refer to someone as a leader, there's really two types of leaders. Leader as the one that has the power, and leader as the one who has influence. And those are two completely different roles and two completely different realities. So let's talk about this for a second. Let's say I open up a company and I am the sole member, director, proprietor of the company. And when it comes to company decisions, I am the only one to make the decision. There's no one else that makes the decision. It's my call. I have all the power. And then let's say I bring in someone else and make them an equal partner in the business. How much power do I now have? 50%. And if I bring in a third member and give them equal power, equal role, I now have 33%. The more people I bring in, the less power I have. When it was just me, I called all the shots. Now, it's me, the other one, and the other one calling the shots. So now we have to vote. Now it's very complicated. I don't have all the power. Assuming they're all equal. Power when it comes to power, the more people you bring in, the less power you have. It's divided like water, like the liquid. The more cups you pour into, the less you have. I had all the power. And now I don't have all the power. I've lost power because I've given you some power. When it comes to influence, think about it. Imagine you have a teacher who's influencing. And the teacher says, I can only impact 100 people. But what if we bring in another teacher? Yeah? Now we can impact 200 people. And if we bring in a third teacher, 300 people. And a fourth teacher, 400 people. Does my power get less? Not at all. My influence is growing, assuming that they're all following this model of teaching that I've developed or whatever it is. Now, the more people I bring in, the more the message is expanding. It's not getting smaller. It's not about power. It's not about power. If it's about power, power always divides. Influence always multiplies. You see the difference? It's like fire. Fire, the more wicks I touch, I bop on the head with my flame, the more lights are lit. Before there was one candle, now there's 10 candles. And each one can now light more candles. Wow, it's exponential growth. There's no telling how many lights can be kindled when it comes to influence. When it comes to power, every time I hand it off, I'm losing. Power and influence. Does this make sense? There are two types of leaders. Those that lead with power and those that lead with influence. There are those whose leadership is marked entirely by power and control. The whole definition of this leader is that they get to call the shots. The more people come in on that, the less power they have. And then there's another form of leadership. There are certain leaders who it's not about power. It's not about power. It's not about control. It's not about telling anyone what or what not to do. It's simply about inspiration. It's about influence. And influence, the more people that we can get on board to influence, to become influencers, I don't mean like the TikTok version, the more the influence can spread. A leader that's all about power fears deeply, F-E-A-R-S, fears people joining the ranks and taking away from his or her power. But someone who's all about influence, all about the message, doesn't fear someone else getting involved. They welcome someone else getting involved. It's like, great, I need some help. We need some more people to be able to continue to spread the light and the message. Now, let's frame this. Let me see here for a second. Let's see if we have some text to get to. Yeah, here we go. Let's place this. Let's now apply this to two Hebrew terms for leaders. There are two forms of leaders. There's a melech and a nasi. A melech is a king, and a nasi, a prince. Nah, not a prince like the king's son. A nasi is the spiritual leader of the people. The melech, the king, was the military leader, like the king, the executive leader of the people. And then you had the nasi, the spiritual leader of the courts. Let's read this inside from the text. All right, this is going to be text number 5. The Rebbe says the following. In the parlance of our sages, there's a fundamental difference between a melech and a nasi, a king, and a spiritual leader. When our sages used the term king, they meant it in the literal sense, as the Torah does, a monarch. When our sages used the term nasi, again a Hebrew word, they primarily refer to the leader of the Sanhedrin, the high Jewish court, or at the very least the spiritual leader of the nation. So you have, I don't know if you call it the physical leader and the spiritual leader, maybe, sort of, physical versus spiritual. You have the king, and then you have the nasi, the spiritual guide. And those are not the same role. In fact, for many centuries, and when I say many centuries, I mean many, many, many centuries, this was always, these two positions of leadership were occupied by two different people. There was someone in the role of melech and someone in the role of nasi. There was the individual who was again, I don't know if you call it I'm not sure I don't know if it's a military leader specifically, but there was an individual who was like in the king position, whether there was a king or no, whether there was a formal king or not a formal king, yet someone in that position of king, monarchy, as it were, power. And then you had another individual who was all about spiritual guidance and Torah wisdom and Torah guidance. Two different people, two different leaders.
Would the Kohen Gadol serve as a Nasi? Or that was...
The Kohen Gadol would be construed as somewhat of a de facto Nasi. Now, not in all generations. Sometimes there was someone else in that role. But yeah, you could say that the Kohen Gadol was more in that role than the king. That he was not a king. He was a spiritual leader. Yeah, that's more akin to that. Now, take a look-see at the next text.
The leaders of the tribe, wouldn't you call them a Nasi?
Sorry?
Each tribe had a leader.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a Nasi?
That's also, the term Nasi is used for many different things to refer to like leadership. But yeah, the leaders of the tribes that brought the sacrifices to inaugurate the Mishkan and the altar specifically were called the Nasim or the Nasi of each tribe. Correct, yeah. But what I'm referring to now is a little bit later on in Jewish history when there were always these two roles. There was the maybe the political leader, and then there was the spiritual leader. Two different roles. So text number 6, we read about Hillel. Hillel Hazaki and Hillel the elder. Take a look. It was taught. Hillel, his son Shimon, his grandson Gamliel, his great-grandson Shimon, they all served in leadership roles during the last 100 years of the Temple era, and leadership roles in the Hebrew, Nisiutan. They were Nasi, they were the Nasi. Okay? There was always a Nasi. And at the same time, text 7, we're not going to go through this, there were those that served more of a political or military role. Two different roles. One, the spiritual leader. One, the more pragmatic, political leader. Take a look at Maimonides, at Rambam, as he describes these roles. Text 8. All the lands a king conquers belong to him. He may give them to his servants and soldiers as he chooses and keep the remainder for himself. And in all these matters, his judgment is binding. Wow, the king has a lot of power. That's the point. The king is the power guy. In all matters, his deeds must be for the sake of heaven. His purpose and intent must be to elevate the true faith and fill the world with justice, destroying the power of the wicked and waging the wars of God. The entire purpose of appointing a king is to execute justice and wage wars. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, sorry for saying blah, 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 but as it goes on. The point is the first paragraph. The king has all this power. And yes, the second paragraph says, and he should choose and he should use it for good. But the real point here is how much power the king has. Let's continue. Text 9a. Let's talk about the other side. What's the other role? Text 9a, the Nasi. First, the Supreme Court is established in the temple, says Maimonides. This is called the Great Sanhedrin. That's the Great High Court. The wisest among them is appointed their chief. He acts as the dean of the assembly. Whenever our sages use the term Nasi, they are referring to this person. He assumes the position of Moses, our teacher, the head of the Bet Din, the head of the Sanhedrin, the great Jewish court, is the position of the Nasi, is the spiritual heir of Moses. Moses, the great teacher of Torah, the great influencer. By the way, we've talked about this many times. I need to recall this point. The court in Judaism, the Sanhedrin, the court was not just about punishing people who did something wrong. It was about educating and guiding. And so the Nasi was the chief inspirer, the chief teacher, the chief guider of the people. And so here we have two roles. The role of the king, the Melech, and the role of the Nasi. The physical leader, political leader, military leader. That's on one side. And the other side, the spiritual leader, the head of the court. One was all about power. If you have two kings, you have no kings. How can two kings operate? The whole point of a king is that one person has the power. Two kings. It's not going to work. So there's one king. And you might say, well, there's also one Nasi. Yeah, but the Nasi, spiritual leader, wasn't about power. It was about influence. It was about creating a system where the influence could spread and spread and spread. It wasn't about division. It was about multiplication. It wasn't about the pouring of the liquid from one vessel to the other. It was about the ignition of fire from one candle to another. It was about multiplication, not division. These were the two different rules. Originally, just so you know, Moses served both.
Yeah.
He did serve both. How do we know this? Well, our sages say it very clearly. Take a look at the next text, which is, all right, text 9b is actually a cool text, sorry. Text 9b, just parenthetically, it says a king may not be included on the Sanhedrin, on the high court, because we can't disagree with him. So the whole point of a court is they have multiple opinions. But if a king joins the court, then that's it, because a king's word is binding. So it doesn't work. The two roles are really incompatible, except for the fact that, every rule has an exception, and the exception here is Moses, the first leader, who wore both hats. Rambam Maimonides, again, we're doing a lot of quoting of Maimonides because he's the chief the chief codifier of law, of Jewish law, and he writes that Moses, our master, was a king, in addition to being the first of the Nasiim. He was a Nasi, because every subsequent one assumes the position of Moses. That means that he was a Nasi. He's also a king, right? He's also a king, a tale of two texts. He was a Nasi, the first one, and he was a king, the first one also. Now, I don't know if anyone's going to say that Moses was the first Jewish king. They'll probably say King Saul was, but he essentially had both roles. He was the military leader. I mean, who else led the people out of Egypt? And he was the Torah leader, because who else spoke with God and transmitted Torah to the people? Moses did both. He was a multi-tool player, right? He was a switch hitter. He was the king and the Nasi. But typically it's one or the other. Typically it's two different roles. By the way, Joshua also wore both hats. The second Jewish leader, Joshua, also wore both hats. Take a look at this. Next text. This is a beautiful text. Text 11. Moses foresaw that Jewish history would be led by partners, meaning two leaders, one doing this and one doing that, as was the case during the era of the Mishnah. He expected that there would be two leaders, one to lead them in war, and another to study Torah and protect them with his merit. Meaning, you have the Melech, the king, who leads the military leader, and the political leader, and then you have the one who's the Torah leader, the spiritual leader. So Moses thought that he was going to be the only one that wore two hats, but the next generation would have two leaders. God told him to instruct Joshua to be the Israelites' king, judge, and lead scholar. Thus God told Moshe, strengthen Joshua and encourage him, strengthen him in Torah study, and encourage him in war. That's why going all the way back, and please journey with me all the way back to that original verse, and where Moses speaks to God about the next Jewish leader, look at what he says. Look all the way back, please, to text number 3. On page 194. Text 3 on page 194. Look at how Moses petitions God. He says, we need someone, verse 17, and I highlighted this before, I dropped the breadcrumb before. We need someone who will go forth before them and come before them. We need a king to go before them, a king to lead them from the top. But then we also need someone who will lead them out and bring them in, someone to go with them. We need someone to inspire them from the inside. We need someone from the outside and someone from the inside. We need a king who's above them, but we also need a spiritual leader who is with them every step of the way. That is what Moses petitions. We need two leaders. And God says, okay, I got one guy for the job. Just like you, Moses, Joshua will be one person that does both jobs. And that's why he says, you're going to lay your hand upon him and you're going to bestow your splendor upon him. And the Medrash says, lay your hand like lighting one candle. He'll be the spiritual leader that lights the candle, and bestow splendor like pouring the vessel, pouring the water, pouring the liquid from one vessel to another, which is the king, i.e. the division of power. But in this case, the power needs to be consolidated, but it would otherwise be divided if it were to be poured. The point of the analogy is simply to say that just like you, Moses, wore both hats, this leader is going to wear both hats, but the purpose of our conversation is to recognize the stark distinction, and it is stark, between the notion of power, a leader that's all about power, versus a leader that's all about influence. These are not the same. These are two very different realities. If your leadership is all about power, and more people come in on that, then you feel threatened. If your position is about influence, and more people come in on that, great. That's the greatest thing that could happen. Power abhors a vacuum also. But power abhors what's it called again? Competition, whereas influence loves competition because it's not competition. It's more influence. All right, here we go. Let's apply it to the two stories. I asked before, we have the story of Korach, where Moses feels threatened, and the story of Eldad and Medad, where Moses says, bring it on. Let there be more prophets. And I said before, why in one case was he all about democratizing these things, and the other one he's like, no, it's got to be consolidated. Moses knew that there were two different roles. One role had to be protected and isolated, and one role needed to be democratized and opened up. When it came 5 chapters ago to the story of Eldad and Medad, prophecy, which is about spiritual influence, sharing God's word, and Eldad and Medad are now prophesying, and Joshua says, stop them from saying prophecy. Moses says, let everybody be a prophet. What's going to happen? More people hear God's word? That's great. If we're talking about influence, the more the merrier. This week's Torah portion, Korach comes along and says, Moses, everybody should be a leader. Why are you the only one that gets to make the call? Why do you call the shots? Moses says, there can only be one king. I don't make the rules. I didn't appoint myself as the king. God did. And if you have an issue, take it up with him. And God says, you can take it up with me in the bowels of the earth, right? But essentially, Moses says there's only room for one king. Prophecy, the more the merrier. Bring it on. But power, only one. Only one. That's the way it needs to be. Make sense? Let's do another text or two that really brings everything home. Okay, here we go. You ready, steady? Spaghetti, as the kids say. Take a look at text number. Text number. We did this. Great. We did 12a, 12b, 13, 14a. Here we go. Rabbi Sachs. This then is the solution to the mystery of why when Joshua feared that Eldad and Medad, who prophesied within the camp, were threatening Moses' authority, Moses replied, would that all the Lord's people were prophets. Bring it on. Joshua had confused influence with power. Eldad and Medad neither sought nor gained power. Instead, for a while, they were given a share of the prophetic spirit that was on Moses. They participated in his influence. That is never a threat to prophetic authority. To the contrary, the more widely it is shared, the more there is. A prophet would say, you also are a prophet? Great! The more prophets, the better. God's word is spreading. That's a good thing. We welcome that. Power, however, is precisely what Korach and his followers sought. And in the case of power, rivalry is a threat to authority. There are many forms of government, monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, but what they have in common is the concentration of power within a single body, whether person, group, or institution, such as a parliament. Without this monopoly and the legitimate use of coercive force, there is no such thing as government. That is why in Jewish law, a king is not allowed to renounce the honor due to him. Moses' request that Korach and his followers be swallowed up at the ground was neither anger nor fear. It was not motivated by any personal consideration. It was a simple realization that whereas prophecy can be shared, kingship cannot, and that's the way it is. Powerful. Moses says to Eldad and Medad, continue speaking God's word. That's fantastic. Moses says to Korach, you need to go because you cannot. There cannot be any leadership, any authority if there is confusion. And I want to conclude with this. Today we don't have a king. Today, the primary source of Jewish leadership, I don't mean in the world there's no monarchies or whatever, authoritarians. I don't mean that. What I mean is within Judaism, you don't have that concentration of power. What you have is influence. And the Torah is reminding us about the beauty of influence and how it differs from power. Power is threatened by others. Authority is weakened when you have others vying for that. But influence is only enhanced. The greatest leader that I've ever had the opportunity to meet was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose yahrzeit is coming up in tomorrow night is the 3rd of Tammuz. And when you think about, as we'll read a text soon, did the Rebbe have power? I don't think the Rebbe had power. He didn't hold a position of power. He held a position of influence. And therefore he welcomed thousands and thousands, and I don't know what the number is, of anyone who was on board. The Rebbe would say, go, take the message, take the inspiration, run with it, and inspire someone else. I'm not threatened that you're going to be the Rebbe sent out thousands of shluchim, of Chabad rabbis and Rebbetzins, emissaries around the world. Not threatened because someone else would be the rabbi in Atlanta, or the rabbi in Johannesburg, or the rabbi in why am I only think of these two cities? The rabbi in Thailand, or the rabbi in Timbuktu, Moscow. Like, oh no, I need to be the. No, it's not about power. It's about influence. Go, run with it. I think the biggest mistake is when a person says that it all has to be held in with me. I think the biggest nachas when it comes to inspiration is when you find out that those that you've inspired continue to inspire others. That is hey, we're doing it in the social hall today because of this setup. The biggest nachas you can get, I say this as someone who's been teaching and trying to teach and influence, in a positive way spiritually. The greatest nachas, the greatest joy and pleasure, the greatest delight is when you hear someone say, you inspire me. What I learned, what I heard, so inspired me that I share it with someone else. That's fantastic. It's like, oh no, I don't want you to be the teacher. I have to be the teacher. No, that's crazy. Of course you want. It's not about the power. It's about the influence, about the idea spreading. So I think what I'm trying to say is, in the spirit of the lesson of this week's Torah portion, in the spirit of the Rebbe's life and legacy, let's not try to hold on to things so tightly. Let's share and encourage others to share. Again, the greatest nachas, the greatest joy, the greatest pleasure is when people share with each other in the social. People share with each other and continue to share. If you're inspired, share the lesson. If you're doing Shabbat, invite someone over. You be the influencer, and the people that you influence them to the point where they become influencers. You see what's going on here? Like, if your candle was lit to whatever extent, then light someone else's to the extent that they'll light someone else's, who will then light someone else's. You see what's happening here? And then the whole world gets lit up in a positive way. That's a good thing. It's exactly what we need. I want to conclude with a text or two. There's like maybe one more text that I want to read, and then we'll close it out. I don't want to read text 14b, do I? 15. Here we go. Beautiful. This is a beautiful text. Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, about the Rebbe. Transformative leaders, he wrote this 4 years ago. Transformative leaders represent a very different vision of leadership. They not only come to serve the community, they recognize that the greatest service one can offer is to help create other transformative leaders. They use their influence to help others become the best version of themselves. This week marks 28 years, again, this is now 32, since the death of the Lubavitcher Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory. Perhaps the most exceptional aspect of the Rebbe's leadership is precisely this: he was determined to turn others into leaders. Today, there are thousands of Chabad Shluchim in every corner of the globe. They each lead synagogues, schools, communities, and organizations. The Rebbe has inspired many leaders within Lubavitch, but his influence goes well beyond Chabad. Joseph Telushkin, in his book Rebbe, which, by the way, if you haven't read the book Rebbe, highly recommend it. It's that one-word title, Rebbe, author Joseph Telushkin. It's worth the read. He relates two examples of the impact of the Rebbe's transformative leadership. The impact the Rebbe's transformative leadership had on rabbis outside the Lubavitch community. The second one is as follows. The book has a second anecdote regarding a second-year student at Cambridge, Jonathan Sachs, who came to visit the Rebbe. This meeting would change Sachs's life trajectory and start him on his career as a rabbi and Jewish leader. Telushkin writes. We're in the social... Yeah, but we'll... Yeah. Yeah, incredible. At the meeting, what first struck Sachs was the Rebbe's understated, non-aggressive manner. For a good while, the Rebbe listened and responded patiently to Sachs's philosophical queries and concerns, always acting as if the most important person in the room was me. But then, having taken his measure of the young man, the Rebbe suddenly turned the conversation around. The interviewee became the interviewer. Things are going wrong, the Rebbe had said to him. Are you willing to be one of those who helps put them right? The young man was taken aback. He had gone into the meeting to ask questions, not to answer them. Furthermore, at that early, somewhat uncertain stage of his life, his intention was to become an economist, a lawyer, or an academic. He certainly did not see himself as a leader, though that was the role the Rebbe was now telling him to assume. At one point, the Rebbe even challenged him as to what he was doing to strengthen Jewish life at Cambridge. The Rebbe's insistent manner made a profound impact on Sachs. I've been told that the Rebbe was a man with thousands of followers. After I met him, I understood that the opposite was the case. A good leader creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. Just keep that line. Hold that line dear. More than the Rebbe was a leader, he created leadership in others. This is the very foundation of transformative leadership. True leaders teach others how to be leaders. And the Rebbe did that thousands of times over. May his memory continue to inspire us to be those people that when things are going wrong, help to put them right. Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. In this case, it's look for the leaders. Look for the leaders. The leaders are not those, again, there are two types of leadership, but not the king types. The leaders are not the ones that get jealous, angry, that are in it for the power. The real leaders are the ones who care about the message and the mission and care about inspiring others. And it's not about self, and it's not about ego, and it's not about is my leadership protected? It's rather simply about is the message, is the goodness, is the light spreading. May we take this message to heart. May we be inspired to not only study more, but to teach more. And you might say, well, I'm not a teacher. But the Rebbe would always say, if you know Aleph, the person says, I only know the first letter of the alphabet. I know the Aleph. Great. Then you can teach it to someone who doesn't. Whatever you know, you can teach. It doesn't matter. I don't know everything. Who knows everything? No one knows everything. Seriously. No one knows everything. But if you know something, if something has touched you, if your light, if your flame, if your candle is lit in whatever area it is, share that with someone else. And share that with someone else to the point that maybe you can't, no guarantees, maybe they'll share it with someone else. In this way, our world would become illuminated with the light of goodness, with love, with godliness, and indeed make the world a better place for all of us. Let us say, Amen. Thank you for joining tonight. Again, to recap, two forms of leadership, two different scenarios, but ultimately today, one prevails. Not the power leadership, but the influence one, which only multiplies. No need to fear. Spread the light. All right, that's it. Thursday, pleasure. Doing great to see you. Thursday, again, is the Rebbe's Yahrzeit. It's a day certainly for meaningful, what's the word I'm looking for? Meaningful, I've lost my language. Resolutions. That's and resolutions, really resolutions, like what, maybe take on another thing, another positive thing, maybe study something special that day, or help inspire someone else. Or commit to something to help inspire someone else. And it could be as simple as inviting someone over to study, to do a mitzvah, share a good word, give tzedakah, I don't know, invite someone to a Shabbat meal, something positive, something beautiful, something caring, something thoughtful, something to bring more light and love into the world. So I think we all can do that. And again, we have to increase the positivity, because certainly we know that those that wish to spin negativity have no problem going big and bold with that. So we need to fight the good fight in the positive way and keep on spreading the light for goodness. Let us say, Amen. All right, good to see you all. What's coming up? Thursday night we have a big gathering here in honor of the Rebbe's 32nd Yahrzeit.
Rabbi Freeman said he's having Tanya.
I don't think it's going to happen. I can speak to him.
Would you? Because he said so today.
He said so today?
No, yeah, when the bris was yesterday.
I'm going to speak with him because I don't think we're going to have class tomorrow night. But Thursday night. I will speak to him. We have JLI tomorrow. For those that are taking the course, we have tomorrow. But Thursday night, I don't think, I'll speak. I can speak with him.
Okay.
Yeah, we
would
have
you
this big
send us
event.
an email?
A big community. Yeah, I'm gonna send you an email.
Okay.
So,
What else do we have? We have some stuff coming up. All right, stay tuned. We got some big announcements. Working on a lot of big things. All right, good.
There's a problem with something.
Yes,
So when it came to Saul,
yes.
so the thing there is because we said we should be like everyone else, because we had the prophet.
The people, they wanted a leader. That was, you know what? The whole thing began on the wrong
Yeah,
foot.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
since we should have both,
Right.
why was it so terrible what we did?
Because they didn't want a real leader. They wanted a leader that was in their pocket. They wanted like a leader that they could, pull the strings on. It's a corruption. You have leaders that get jealous and angry, and then you have people that want leaders that are puppet leaders that they. Anyway, there's no shortage of corruption when it comes to leadership. So that's what I'm saying. Ultimately, even though we explained the two stories and how they're not a contradiction, I think ultimately what we're leaning toward is away from the power model and more to the influence model, because that is the way that real change happens. So that's it. Okay. Good.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you. I'll say goodnight to everybody. Laila Tov. See you guys next time. Take care.